Welcome to this, I think, very important and interesting topic on approaches to agricultural cooperative development financing, governance, and market access, which is indeed a very central and important topic for all issues relating to addressing rural development, reducing poverty and hunger. So I have a pleasure to introduce the panel today. My name is Marcela Villarreal. I'll be giving some initial remarks, and after that I'll be chairing the session. But I'd like to introduce our two panelists who are indeed, I'm extremely happy that they have agreed to embark jointly with us, FAO, together with the Cooperative College and the Plunkett Foundation. So we have Linda Shaw. Linda Shaw is a vice principal at the Cooperative College in Manchester, and she's responsible for international and research programs at the Cooperative College. And here at my left, I have the pleasure of introducing Peter Couchman. Peter is the chief executive of the Plunkett Foundation. He spent his career before that in the cooperative movement, and he is best known for helping to make Oxford Swindon Gloucester Cooperative an internationally recognized example for engaging members and marketing its cooperative identity. So I'm sure that we will be able to engage, hopefully after the presentations, in a very lively discussion. And we'll be very happy to hear from you, from the audience. So let me start with the initial remarks, which I will give from there. Is this working? Can you hear me well? Is it okay? Good. Fine. Wonderful. So what I'd like to do with you this afternoon is to look into where we're going a little bit in terms of renewed international interest on agricultural cooperatives worldwide. Just go back a little bit to what FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, is doing with an emphasis on cooperatives. We will look at them, these cooperatives, as also very effective means of reducing hunger and rural poverty. And we will talk also about an innovative partnership that has to do with financing cooperatives and addressing one of the major bottlenecks of cooperatives in their functioning. We have seen that the cooperative movement, all in all, has received renewed international interest, and we saw that very clearly throughout the United Nations deliberations on having cooperatives be the center of an international year. So the General Assembly of the United Nations declared 2012 the International Year of Cooperatives, and this is basically a very clear recognition of how cooperatives contribute in a sustainable way to economic and social empowerment and are effective means of reducing hunger and poverty. This links very well with the international year that we are about to start. Actually, this month in New York, we are launching the International Year of Family Farming, which is, of course, very much related to the issue of cooperatives. Our idea is to be able to link the 2 years in a way in which we will be seeing effective means of supporting family farming, supporting cooperatives, and ensuring that together they will be effective means of ending hunger. Now, in our organization in the United Nations, also cooperatives are much more at the center of the work of international rural development than they have ever been. Our Director General has declared that partnerships with cooperatives and the cooperative movement are going to be one of the priorities of his mandate. He has opened specific dedicated office space. We have declared just last year, during the Year of Cooperatives, our World Food Day topic was on how agricultural cooperatives are key to feeding the world. World Food Day is a celebration that not only takes place in Rome at the very high level, but it also takes place in around 150 countries. So we brought the issue of agricultural cooperatives very much to the center of the attention in all of these 150 countries around the world. We're also hosting COPAC Secretariat, the Committee for the Promotion and the Advancement of Cooperatives, in our own headquarters in FAO. Now, my own office, the office that I head, which is called the Office for Partnerships, Advocacy and Capacity Development, has a unit that addresses the issues of cooperatives and producer organizations, and I'm very happy to say that my colleagues, Nora and Maria Grazia, are here today with us from that unit. Very important in our FAO's work. We have signed a memorandum of understanding with ICA, GDC, and other key partners. So this is a growing area, and it's becoming more and more central to the work of FAO as we move down the new mandate of the new Director General. Now, one thing that we have been doing, we have been working in the last year and a half, is to create a new strategic framework for the organization. The strategic framework with 5 strategic objectives, and in each one of them, cooperatives have a very, very important role to play. First objective is about helping to eliminate hunger, food insecurity, and malnutrition. This is basically because even if hunger levels have been diminishing in the world, and this is more or less, there's a trend of diminishing hunger throughout the last couple of decades, we are now at 842 million people living in chronic hunger and malnutrition. 842 million is 842 million too many living in poverty, hunger, and malnutrition. So the idea is that we will be effectively contributing to eliminating hunger, where the only acceptable number is 0, through this strategic objective, basically by committing governments, getting their political will, not only having them commit to the fight against hunger, but also seeing what action they're taking in terms of having action plans, laws, enabling environments, and also, naturally, allocating the resources that are necessary for the fight against hunger. That is one strategic objective. We also have our second strategic objective, which is basically recognizing the central contribution of agriculture and agricultural growth to overall economy, but also very specifically to the reduction in poverty. So in order for that contribution to be very effective, agricultural production, and here we take into account also fisheries and forestry, needs to increase, but it needs to be increasing in a very sustainable way. So we need to do that in a way in which we take into account environmental considerations, very specifically the impact of climate change and others. It has to be sustainable or it can't be. Third strategic objective is about reducing rural poverty. And the reduction of rural poverty happens through support to the smallholder. When you have smallholders who have low levels of productivity, we need to ensure that that productivity increases, and part of that comes through organization and through cooperatives. We also have those rural workers who are extremely poor and who sell their labor in order to get an income. We promote decent rural employment, and we know that cooperatives are essential to provide rural employment. So again, it is central here. And the third aspect of that objective is basically supporting those who fall out, either of production or of employment, basically through social safety nets. Fourth strategic objective is about enabling inclusive and efficient agricultural food systems. As we move more and more into global value chains, we need to ensure that those value chains are inclusive of the smallholder, that they're inclusive of women, of indigenous people, and so on. They need to be inclusive and they need to be fair in order for them to serve the objective of reducing hunger and poverty. Finally, fifth strategic objective is about increasing resilience of livelihoods from disasters. We know that crises, including weather-related crises or man-made crises, are increasing. They're on the increase, and of course, climate change is not helping. Therefore, what we need to do is to improve the resilience of people, rural people, so that they can protect themselves against the effect of these crises and these shocks. Now, agricultural cooperatives, as I have also mentioned, they contribute very, very, very clearly to delivering each one of FAO's strategic objectives. We know that cooperatives empower members both economically and socially, and they create rural employment through business models that are more resilient to economic and environmental shocks. And therefore, cooperatives give us a model that is sustainable and that is effective in helping people be protected against shocks, but also be more productive and are more able to access markets, more able to find agricultural inputs to get them through improved prices in a way that is sustainable. Agricultural cooperatives also offer a number of services that are essential to the smallholders and the small producers, including natural resource management, access to information, knowledge and extension services, access to better priced inputs and outputs, access to markets worldwide, and also they improve the ability of rural people to participate in policy and decision-making, which is again a central element of rural development, and it's a central element of good agricultural policy. So cooperatives are at the center of what we do in every aspect of the organization. Now, okay, here we go. FAO has approved recently a corporate strategy on capacity development. For capacity development, we're addressing basically three different levels: the individual, the institution, and then, of course, the enabling environment where that capacity is going to be developed and is going to be done in a sustainable way. Now, from the individual perspective, we are supporting technical and managerial skills that will allow people to have better participation in the processes that are important and relevant to themselves. And in the rural areas, this is a very central and important element. And this, of course, is addressing very specifically those who are usually left out of capacity development efforts, like very specifically women, the youth, indigenous people, and others. At the institutional level, we provide strengthening of the organizations in terms of their efficiency, their being equitable, in terms of being able to be sustainable and to embrace their different members and their different points of views, and also very specifically in cooperatives, of course, that they are able to be strong democratic cooperatives. And finally, regarding the enabling environment, which is of course very, very, very central for cooperatives to be able to develop, to form, and to thrive, we look at what is necessary for the countries to have in place so that this can happen, so that we can have strong cooperatives that are sustainable and that are able to meet the needs of their members and the needs of overall development of the country. Now, you will hear from our panel today how important financing is and how important the financing issues can become a bottleneck for cooperatives. So we are developing innovative models, including one that I will just briefly mention. We are in partnership with the Global Development Cooperative in terms of supporting the cooperatives to meet their needs in terms of financing and in terms of strengthening. Now, this is one of the legacies of the International Year of Cooperatives. So the International Year of Cooperatives is not something that happens in 1 year and it's over, but we wanted very specifically for that year to be significant in terms of the legacy and in terms of what it's going to be able to achieve throughout the years. And this is one example. So the concept of the GDC, the Global Development Cooperative, came from ICA, and also from the international, from the Cooperative Bank in the UK. And basically, the idea is that the GDC will be able to support cooperative business in developing countries. And the idea is that they will help cooperatives to have access to fair and competitively priced loans for capital and infrastructure projects. So that is the area that looks at the loans that are going to come from GDC. But on the other hand, and this is where the collaboration with the FAO comes in, we want there to be an aspect of that initiative that will be addressing the needs of the poorest cooperatives, those more in need, through technical assistance for their strengthening and for them to be able to become equitable and efficient, and for them to be able to be also sustainable. So FAO is going to come in here with the aspect of grants. Well, through our partnership, we will be able to identify cooperatives that would need to access a grant such as this kind, and who will be able to benefit from the wealth of materials, of methodologies, of tools, of experience that FAO can offer through also this medium. And we hope that this is going to be a very effective way of supporting cooperatives and supporting cooperatives in their efficiency to address hunger and malnutrition issues throughout the world. Finally, we spoke about how international cooperatives are now on the international agenda for food security and hunger eradication. And this is not an easy thing. This didn't come as an evident thing. It came after years of the agricultural sector having been basically neglected. From international development assistance, from national development issues, and from development theory. Now agriculture is back, very strongly so, in the international agenda, and agricultural cooperatives are being recognized as being very effective means to address issues that come in agriculture and rural development. We in FAO are fully committed to this agenda and to strengthen and partner with cooperatives and with producer organizations. The GDC Fund is really an innovative financial instrument, and you'll hear more from financial instruments just in a moment. And we are sure that our partnership, FAO-GDC, will provide opportunities for sustainable food security and poverty reduction. Africa has just signed a declaration where Africa is committing to eliminating hunger in our lifetime, and hopefully before our lifetime. So it's hunger zero by 2025 for Africa. And we believe that cooperatives are an essential part of this commitment becoming a reality.
So I'm going to talk really about the background to the challenge of financing cooperatives, and talk particularly about some research that the UK Cooperative College carried out in 2010, so a little while ago now, which was commissioned by the UK Cooperative Bank, and which was intended to assess the financing needs of cooperatives in developing countries in order to inform the potential establishment at that stage of a global cooperative development fund. And of course, this came against, as my colleague has just mentioned, the backdrop of a global cooperative revival and of a growing interest in the role that cooperatives can play in tackling food insecurity and in growing economies. So the background of the work was really this need to scale up development assistance, particularly for cooperatives, and a recognition and an attempt to assess what the financial needs were. We carried out a number of interviews and it was done via a questionnaire. We did, as you might expect, a literature review. Our main focus really was internally on the views from the cooperative movement itself. plus some external stakeholders. So that was the main focus, because as you can appreciate, it was global in scope. So this was actually a very high-level survey. We didn't go in any great depth of the barriers and needs at a country level, and I think that job is still one that needs to be done. But ours really to map the landscape by talking to cooperatives within the ICA family at the regional and sometimes at the national level about what they perceive their financial needs were. And I think it would come as no surprise to any of us that a great variety of financing needs were reported by cooperatives, and the gap was apparent between what the co-ops identified as their financing needs and available investment funds. So although there were some initiatives already out there to help assist co-ops in financing for scaling up and for development, they were nowhere near meeting the needs of the co-ops as was identified by the cooperatives themselves. And of course, when you break down what the needs are, financing needs of cooperatives are, they do vary hugely according to sector. For example, utilities, that is, electric, water supply, housing co-ops need huge amounts of upfront finance and capital, much more perhaps than their colleagues in the agricultural sector. What we found was a very clear and defined need for agricultural and financial cooperatives in the developing world of mid-range and long-term financing. So what was coming, the message that was coming from the movement was actually not the microfinance agenda at all, but mid-range loans, something between $250,000 to $750,000. And typically there was a gap, particularly from secondary co-ops or cooperative unions or networks of cooperatives, rather than individual co-ops. They were the ones that were struggling to find this kind of size of capital investment or loan funding to enable them to, there was a real bottleneck for them in terms of scaling up their activities. And these findings were very much in line with a number of other studies which had also identified this missing middle in agricultural finance. And we, from our work with the movement, identified a very similar gap for cooperatives. The main types of finance required, well, this is not an exclusive list, but these were some of the main kinds. So lines of credit for liquidity management, long-term loans for infrastructure investment. This might be, for example, a dairy co-op who wanted to put in a value-adding processing plant. It might be for transport improvements. It might be for IT installation. And of course, that goes on to the third point of medium-term loans for technology upgrading. And then the financial cooperatives also identified a specific need for their secondary co-ops or even tertiary level co-ops for on-lending funds for financial cooperatives such as savings and credit cooperatives. So these were the spectrum of the main kinds, but not exclusively the only types of finance that we identified as having a gap. Why the lack of provision for cooperatives? Well, I'm be interested to hear your comments on this issue. Several respondents, there was certainly a lack of access to financial intermediaries for many cooperatives. They simply either didn't know or had not been able to access local banking systems or particularly perhaps agricultural investment programs. Often the amounts they wanted for this, remember this is mid-range financing, were too large for microfinance programs. This was not certainly within the remit of the microfinance programs that typically offer very, very small amounts of money to micro-entrepreneurs. And often they were regarded as too risky by commercial banks, and there are a number of reasons for this, relating sometimes to the lack of fixed assets by cooperatives, sometimes relating to the fact that local banks did not understand the nature of cooperatives, didn't understand how they worked, judged them against certain commercial criteria that simply were not appropriate for cooperatives. Many also reported high interest rates for loans they were seeking, 25 to 30% interest rates, plus that was also a major barrier. I would also say that there was clearly, we have to be open about this, a skills gap sometimes in the cooperatives themselves. I think this is in line with comments earlier about the technical capacity within the cooperatives. Sometimes, or many cooperatives found it quite difficult to put together a reasonable business case and lack capacity to prepare, a credible loan application. So there was clearly a need for technical assistance for those cooperatives to be able to, build a proper portfolio, to understand how they would, generate the business, how they would repay the loan, etc., etc. So there was certainly a strong element here of a need for capacity building. And obviously we can have a discussion. I'm sure there are other factors as well. Well, since then, and obviously that study was 3 years ago. I mean, we don't see that the picture has changed to any large extent since then. There is still a need for missing middle finance, and this is actually, there have been a number of further studies which have corroborated this gap. I think the evidence is very clear. My own take on this, but I from the literature and my own experience as well, is in a way that such a loan fund is becoming even more imperative, especially in continents such as Africa, where you are seeing, economic growth and development. You are seeing growing local and regional market opportunities that are there for the co-ops, if they can scale up, if they can access the finance to scale up, to take advantage of. And I think when we did the study 2010, this wasn't the discussion around value change was much more focused, for example, on international markets. I think it's certainly evident now, and it's certainly evident from the cooperatives that we've been working with in East and Southern Africa, that the real opportunities now are in regional and local markets. And I think this makes the need for such financing even more imperative. And as we've been discussing, there are now, early stages, but the Global Development Fund is one way to mobilise more resources within the movement to help support financing. And I think there is also examples of good practice emerging, which also could be scaled up. And I'm referring here to, for example, the Ugandan cooperative movement, which has at the local level established links between credit unions and local agricultural co-ops to form a bridge for local, much smaller scale financing to help local producers, local members of local producer co-ops wait while the produce is sold on the market. They can get a loan from the local credit union that helps them over that very tricky period, when they're waiting for the corn to get to the market and be sold, and then the money gets back to them. There's often a gap for those farmers, and some innovative schemes at the local level link agricultural cooperatives with financial cooperatives. And I think this is a very useful model and could obviously complement the missing middle, as it were, could provide a kind of cooperative, as it were, local level pipeline for financing as well. I'm just going to finish my report really with some reflections from my own experience in the field in the last few years in East and Southern Africa, because I think we sit often in these rooms and sometimes it feels quite distant from the cooperatives that we've been working with. But for example, we've been working with tea smallholders in Kericho in Kenya. These are new cooperatives. There are 15,000 of members now in 5 cooperatives with a new cooperative union. They want mid-range loan financing to build a tea warehouse and to add value to their products. We've been working with a coffee union at Mzuzu in northern Malawi. The coffee union has been established, has had quite a long and somewhat turbulent history, but is doing very well. It has at the moment good access to fair trade markets. I think it brings together around 7,000 smallholder farmers, coffee growers. It would like some financing, a loan, to enable it to tackle more effectively climate change problems, the problem of climate change, by helping and training their farmers to adapt their farming techniques to the impact of climate change, diversify crops, and diversify their products. This is a picture of their sorting factory. They're sorting the coffee beans. So it's one example. And finally, the last example, we had a workshop in Uganda about a year ago. This is a new co-op union. It's one of the new market-focused co-op unions in Uganda. This is probably a pretty typical sight for many of us. There are some cattle somewhere on that truck. The Meat Producers Co-op Union wants mid-range financing to bring in dedicated trucks that can transport cattle to market in humane conditions, with a commitment to animal welfare, which of course is also a win-win situation, because the meat that comes from those better journeys is also better quality. But there's another example of a co-op that is a union that's relatively new, is poised to take advantage of the growth in local and regional markets, and desperately needs loan capital to help it improve the services to its members. Thank you. The needs are pressing. I think the question is, how can we work together to enable the financing to happen?
It's now my pleasure to give the floor to Peter Couchman. Would you like to talk from here?
Shall I do it for me, just to make sure it's working? Is that okay for everyone? I'll stay here rather than risk that. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for the invite to be here. In the interest of good governance, I should declare I've recently become a governor of the Co-operative College, so I was delighted to be doing a double act with Linda. But I'm going to be coming from a slightly different, but I think very complementary perspective. So what I'm going to look at is the work that we've been doing, which is referred to as the Dunstey Declaration, and what that is saying around some of the issues that we face. The Declaration really came about through a long history, really. The Plunkett Foundation was created by Sir Horace Plunkett, who was the pioneer of Irish agricultural cooperation. So he worked in a country that actually had for centuries been a colony, had been economically, socially and culturally suppressed, and that cooperation was seen as a way through that. So in a very small country, over 1,000 cooperatives were formed relatively quickly. And he then took those ideas wider internationally and created us to help that process to be, including visiting South Africa on a number of occasions. When we got to the International Year of Cooperatives, our discussions were, well, what should we do that would make a difference in that year? Rather than doing lots of little things or having a nice party, what could we do that would actually gain momentum to take things forward? And our analysis of the situation was that there was a real challenge in our movement. And that was, we create a huge impact on rural communities with a range of cooperatives in the world today. And it's just staggering the number of things that we do. It's not just agriculture, obviously, it's energy, it's rural development, rural services, a huge range within there. And if you listen to the international agencies such as FAO, they will talk about rural cooperation and see it in the round. But if you come to us, we don't. We think in terms of sectors. And the reality is that agricultural co-ops don't sit down with energy co-ops and don't sit down with finance co-ops and so on. That we've fragmented ourselves when our strength should be together. So we started to float the idea, what would happen if we could get round a table a group that represented both different nations and different forms of rural cooperatives to think and to talk together. And we shared this idea with many and certainly got a lot of interest there. The one that threw us out completely that we hadn't planned on was the Plunkett family itself. So the family descended from Horace's brother. And they said, what a great idea. Would you like to borrow our castle? And so they gave us their castle, to actually gather in together and do that. Don't normally get offered that in the co-op movement, I have to say. It was a first for me. So we gathered at Dunsany Castle in County Meath in Ireland. Wonderful old castle. No family in Ireland has lived in the same place longer than the Plunketts have lived in Dunsany. And this was also the birthplace of the Irish Co-operative movement. It was here the first meetings were held to consider what would happen. And you could still see that echoing today. The women's group that Horace helped to form to actually change the role of women in rural Ireland was still meeting down the road from there. It was so rich with history. And so we brought together a group of people. As I say, now 2 of them now on the ICA board, because not only with Dame Pauline, but Martin Lowry, who's just been elected, was there as well. And over a very intense 48 hours, we explored what were the issues affecting rural cooperatives and what were some of the routes that could come through that. And at the end of that process, we signed the Dunsany Declaration. And you can see Dame Pauline signing it here, using a quill pen that had belonged to Sir Horace Plunkett, with his portrait on the wall behind. And basically the declaration was designed to kick-start us thinking about rural cooperation as a movement. If I'm absolutely honest, we have no interest in producing a document. We want to create change, but the document was the starting point for that. If anyone hasn't read the declaration, you can either see it online, we've got a few copies at the front here, and a few leaflets about Plunkett. What the declaration really says was a wide range of things, but there were some key elements. The first thing was our movement getting on the front foot and saying that we live in a world with a whole range of challenges and 2 choices. Are we to see the future of the challenges we face controlled by large corporations and their interests in the world, or are we to attempt to actually raise the role that communities can play in taking ownership of those solutions through cooperation and starting to solve it for themselves? We also wanted to challenge the attitude that often, well, rural doesn't matter as much now because we're all moving to cities. And the point that we made, despite the massive surge in cities in the world, that we do live in an increasingly urbanized world, but the reality is there are still over 3 billion people living in rural areas. 3 billion people helping to feed the rest of that world, provide many of their natural resources, etc. And so therefore these were issues that mattered both to them directly and around the world. So the declaration looked at 10 different elements that it saw we needed to make progress on. And I only flicked through them, but I wanted to show in particular its relationship to finance. So the first one was legislation. And one of the things that has emerged in the Dunsany work since then is obviously all cooperatives want good legislation. But what we were starting to get conversations going with is even good cooperative legislation can sometimes not be designed for rural areas. And so therefore there were challenges to be had there. But we realised that democracy is not only an important part of cooperatives, it's also actually often where people get the first chance to learn about democracy and then go on to other roles in their own society. That we were the breeding ground for activists in societies beginning to take control of their destiny, and we could do more there. I'm sure the college will be delighted that education and advocacy were 2 that we thought were needed within the world to get our message across within there. And that also we shouldn't see this as being short-term. This is actually about reaching out to future generations to play a role cooperatively as well. And that work needed to start now, not when all of us were approaching the end. We were also frank about ourselves to say that we often lack the data to demonstrate our impact. We actually trot out a range of cooperative figures, some of which are beginning to age now, some of which are, if not dubious, certainly hard to completely explain how we got there with. And if we really want to sit at the tables with other international players, we need to do more to actually demonstrate how real that impact is. We believe that it is, we could do more. We also needed to show more connection to community, that cooperatives shouldn't be seen as separate, but they were connecting there. And going back to that original idea behind the declaration, to build understanding between different forms of cooperatives, that we are still too separate in our thinking. That we all had a role to make sure that the technology needed to take this forward was accessible. And then the final 2, the first one was that we needed to transfer knowledge between each other. There was virtually no problem that a community was facing that actually someone else hadn't solved cooperatively somewhere else in the world, and how do we actually move that knowledge between? And I think we've come to a stage to actually see that that is probably the key to this whole process. If we can get knowledge moving in our movement, we will become a stronger movement. And last but by no means least, finance. Absolutely needed, and certainly endorsing what Linda was saying earlier on about those needs there. So that was the declaration, and one of our key bits for that is now to see that, this is a contribution towards the blueprint. This will go on in what we refer to as the Duntony process of encouraging more connection between rural cooperatives to think together what is the rural voice in achieving the blueprint, which is such a vital part of our future. So what's our learning so far in that process that would impact on the discussion around finance? I think the first thing was to actually really to support fully the development of the global development co-op approach. So needed within that, coordination between, support within. So absolutely vital. If it wasn't there, we'd be calling for someone to invent it. So well done to all for in there. The first thing that we start to see, though, is we think there is some new thinking that we need in our movement, and we see the glimmers out there. The first one is to actually think finance, if we simply do it the same way that everybody else does, then we're missing cooperative tricks. And what we see with some of the work that we're doing, it's about actually realising it's the connection to community that changes our financial world. So again, picking just a few countries within there, obviously you can tell this isn't filmed in Africa. This is a community in England saving their pub through what we call community shares. So the community themselves actually raising some of the money, often at very modest levels between each other, to actually help to buy the asset. And boy, does that send a message to the other funders of how serious this community is for that. So community shares rising up as a model, great work being done by Cooperatives UK in promoting that within there. Interesting, these people are, by English standards, are a remote rural community just down the road, probably for many nations here. 1 year on, they not only had a profitable pub, they'd also actually developed a cooperative shop, a library, and allotments as well. So that connecting the finance works. And you can do it in farming as well. This is a farm called Faulthall Farm in England, not too far from there. Brother and sister here were going to lose the farm that their father had rented for his entire life because they couldn't afford to buy it. Instead, they thought cooperatively. And Faulthall Farm today has one farmer and 8,000 owners. The community and those that cared about the style of farm they were doing invested in the farm, and they own it cooperatively, and they're the main market for their products as well. So by reaching out beyond just the agricultural need, they unlocked a connection to that. One of my favourite examples of how bold can you be on that one are these people. This is Battle Creek in Alberta in Canada, and part of a project there called Unleashing Local Capital. Now, these people really are remote. And certainly the distances they're travelling are significantly larger than the English ones there. And they work in some pretty challenging conditions. The only route to market that these farmers have is the railway. And they often have to load the trucks in -30 to get their product to market within there. So this is a really tough life. And without the railways, they're not there. So what happened? Canadian Railways announced they were going to close the railway. So this was the complete end of their farming life if that happened. There was no other option, no other way they could do it there. And they couldn't afford themselves as a group of farmers to actually buy a railway. So what they did is they actually went to all the communities along the track and convinced them that they could actually help to save the railway. They got the communities to invest in the railway as a cooperative, and it's now a cooperative railway line, meeting the needs of the farmers, meeting the needs of communities, attracting external investment as well, because they thought wider than just the farming needs. They thought about the whole community needs and how it would impact on everybody. And that's what I think is the cooperative funding for the future, thinking beyond your own need to others and forming new alliances. A good example for us there, and I'm delighted to have a member of the Plunkett Foundation, is Divine Chocolate. We've already heard of, obviously already some of the excellent work around fair trade. What I love with Divine Chocolate is the cocoa growers here didn't just actually choose to sell their cocoa to be sold in a fair trade product in Britain. They actually own a large chunk of the cooperative that actually is making the chocolate. So the growers are now actually receiving the benefit not merely of the raw material, but of every single stage, including the retail, of production. That, to me, is the new thinking there. How do we actually link internationally in a way that, quite frankly, our competitors never could do? So those are some of the thinkings around finance that we would say, let's challenge ourselves to be bold. What I would say, really, to draw together is probably three key elements that we would see that needs to make finance work. The first thing is to admit that finance is vital, but it's only part of the solution. A few years back, when I was involved in an organisation called Co-operative Futures, we looked around the world at when co-ops were successful. And what we found is there was a whole diversity of different approaches, but one of the elements was that every successful cooperative movement had a financing mechanism a part of what they did. They weren't always the same, but they always had one in there. So it is an important part. What we find the challenge is when you've got money and you go to people, that's what they see. But the reality is that people want finance, but they need support. And the best programs we've ever been involved with are always the ones where they came to us because they actually could see that money was there. When you spoke to them at the end, they say what really made the difference was being given the help, the technical assistance that Marcella referred to there. So therefore, for us, it is about how you combine those two. The more seamless they are, the better. Our Plunkett Foundation style with the communities that we work with is it's been a very long time working with people about what they want to be, what they want to achieve, and how they'll achieve it together before we even think about the financial needs within there, because that's how you get sustainability. A group of people bonded with real vision who then need finance to help make that work. And so I think what we have to really do as cooperatives is rethink what does support mean in the modern world? If we actually say locked within our amazing international movement is the knowledge that can solve virtually any problem, and there's virtually none you can find that cooperatives haven't done, how do we start to think of moving that knowledge around to make sure that those, many of which are in rural poverty, has been referred to there, many of which face challenges, can access the very best thinking around it? That's what our movement was always intended. With a modern world, suddenly we can connect so much faster within there. So we would say we think that there's a real opportunity to be had here, if my clicker will move, as we gather in Cape Town, to actually say, how do we actually go from beyond being nice to each other, how do we actually go beyond wishing great respect to each other, to actually rethink how we connect to each other, to actually get the knowledge that is needed to tackle the huge challenges that Marcella has mentioned but already within there, that the cooperative movement can play its role there, and we can be proud of actually what we've done together there. That's what we see as the Dunsingley approach within there, and certainly we think GDC is a vital part of doing that one. So we certainly commend it to you and look forward to the discussions around that, and look forward to hear what you have to say. Thank you very much.
We have to be bold about how we address these issues, and the best way of addressing these issues is through cooperative ideas themselves. So thank you very much for those two very, very inspiring presentations. And now it is my pleasure to open the floor. We would like to engage with all of you in a very interesting, sparkful, innovative dialogue so that you can bring up any ideas that you'd like to share, any questions, any suggestions, any thoughts. And you can also ask very specific questions from each one of our panelists. Yes, please. I see a person here, then number 2, and then number 3 over there in the back. I will call you in the order in which I see your hands. So if I'm not calling you, please make sure that you make me see your hand up. Yes. So yes, please. Would you all please introduce yourselves before you take the floor?
Thanks, Madam Chair. My name is Lawrence Munyai from Sanako Youth. Sanako stands for South African National Apex Cooperative. I would like to pose my question to Peter to say what do you see? I follow what you say. I mean, it's a beautiful presentation. What do you see as alternatives, particularly in the African continent, for financing. I'm saying that because in most cases, the agreements by ministerial meetings and so forth end up in papers, and it's not necessarily translated in many instances into practical action. What do you propose as alternative financing models, specifically looking at the African continent and its challenges? Thanks.
Thank you. I'll take a few questions and then I'll give back the floor to you. Yes, please.
Merci beaucoup. Je suis Ephraim Chikplonou du Togo, une coopérative du secteur agricole. Je vois les gens n'ont pas des choses. Mais... Bon, permettez-moi de déplacer un peu le débat concrètement sur le terrain de l'Afrique, mais l'Afrique subsaharienne. Hier, dans cette même salle, ou bien aujourd'hui plutôt, non, c'était plutôt hier, on a parlé de Co-operative, une organisation canadienne qui intervient dans les pays africains, qui a plié bagage au Togo parce que le secteur agricole n'arrive pas à suivre la cadence de cette organisation. Pourquoi? Les agriculteurs les coopératives agricoles sont dévoués, ont la volonté de bien faire. Les organismes qui veulent apporter leur soutien sont forts derrière ces coopératives, mais très souvent, la nature n'accompagne pas les coopératives. Si je parle de la nature, les pluies manquent, donc c'est la sécheresse, ou bien bientôt c'est l'inondation et autres, ce qui fait que le financement dans le secteur agricole est un financement à haut risque que beaucoup n'acceptent pas s'y lancer. Alors que nos coopératives dans ce monde, je parle de l'Afrique subsaharienne, nos coopératives dans ce milieu sont des coopératives pas très fortes, qui n'ont pas assez d'infrastructures. Donc tout financement qui va vers les infrastructures est un financement qui fait peur aux bailleurs. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes contents d'entendre Madame de United Kingdom qui a parlé de Global Fund for Cooperative Development in Africa. Je crois que c'est un fonds qui pourrait beaucoup aider. Mais tout à l'heure, celui qui m'a précédé a bien posé la question. Est-ce que ce serait encore entre les gouvernementaux avec des papiers qui vont rester dans les tiroirs, ou bien ce serait une approche GDC, les coopératives elles-mêmes, et trouver les moyens de subventionner, parce qu'à maintes reprises, vous avez fait sortir le mot subvention, de subventionner essentiellement les infrastructures afin que la production, la vente et autres puissent accompagner sans être coincés. Vous savez que dans ces pays, nous n'avons pas assez de micro-assurance, ce qui fait que même les travaux engagés, l'argent qu'on a pour faire les activités, des fois rentre dans les problèmes sociaux et que la résolution devient difficile. Donc, il faudrait que le financement puisse penser à ces conditions des organisations coopératives très faibles qui sont sur le point de démarrer et avoir des conditions allégées pour pouvoir les faire sortir de leur misère. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, la troisième demande, c'est derrière Madame, s'il vous plaît.
Merci de m'avoir accordé la parole. Je suis Madame Marie-Julienne Longombendo du Congo-Brazzaville. Je suis membre d'une coopérative agropastorale Femmes Unies pour le développement durable. J'ai suivi avec attention les deux présentations, très intéressées parce que nous sommes dans le domaine agricole Et au même moment, je fais partie aussi du cabinet du ministre de l'Agriculture en tant que coopératrice. Alors, j'ai constaté les réalisations que Dr Linda venait de nous présenter. Je félicite vraiment le travail de la Fondation et de l'organisme. Mais je voudrais poser la question de savoir, quand elle a présenté les éléments, j'ai constaté que c'est en Afrique anglophone que plus les actions sont concentrées. Je voudrais savoir comment l'Afrique francophone peut bénéficier de vos appuis, vos différents appuis. La deuxième préoccupation, vous avez posé la question de savoir, après votre présentation, comment travailler ensemble. Bon, nous sommes ici, Africains et Africaines, de deux tendances anglophones et africaines. Je vous poserai la question de savoir comment travailler avec l'Afrique francophone. Dans le comment faire, comment travailler, tout de suite j'ai eu l'idée, pour ne pas déjà entamer la deuxième présentation, les questions se retrouvent au niveau de l'information, de la formation, l'accompagnement des coopératives, les leçons apprises, les échanges d'expériences sont aussi les aspects qu'on peut développer entre coopératives et même des deux zones qui entraîneraient aussi les coopératrices ou coopérateurs de faible capacité de se développer. Et je souhaite que ce genre de stratégie soit développée dans votre plan de travail. Maintenant, ma deuxième préoccupation va droit à la présentation du responsable de la Fondation qui venait de nous présenter une très bonne expérience. Mais sur sa présentation, j'ai retenu deux préoccupations. Je suis d'accord avec lui quand il dit que les financements seuls ne peuvent pas résoudre le problème des coopératives. Il faut un accompagnement. C'est ce qui est normal. Si ici en Afrique, à mon avis, si on n'arrive pas, c'est parce que deux fois, cet accompagnement manque. Et la coopérative, vous savez que c'est un instrument dualiste, l'économie et le social. Et quand on sait que le social est soutenu par l'économie, et que si les membres ne sont pas socialement soutenus, et ça serait difficile que l'économie puisse se développer. Parce que dans les principes coopératifs, il y a un aspect, celui d'abord de résoudre des besoins des membres. Ça, c'est la première préoccupation des coopérateurs, et développer l'entreprise coopérative. Mais comment développer l'entreprise coopérative si le social n'est pas soutenu? Ça, c'est une préoccupation que nous devrons regarder. Et surtout les coopératives pauvres, qui sont fragiles, comment le faire? Comment les accompagner? Ça, c'est une préoccupation. La coopérative n'est pas seulement une affaire des éminents professeurs et autres, mais c'est d'abord le terrain, les praticiens. Quel est le problème réel des praticiens? Je crois que c'est cet accompagnement. Et quand vous dites que c'est ensemble que nous devrons travailler, mais c'est ensemble que nous devrons aussi connaître les problèmes des uns et des autres pour voir comment bâtir les synergies collectives pour avancer. Donc, pour ne pas
Merci.
garder le micro,
Merci.
vraiment, je souhaite que vraiment vos stratégies prennent en compte ces aspects. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Madame. I'd like to ask how much time we have, given that we did start late. So just to know how to organize the debate. I do have a number of hands that have asked for the floor. So 10 minutes, 10 more minutes. Okay, so instead of giving the floor back to our panelists, I'm going to take the two questions that I've seen already, and one is right here in front. I saw another hand in the back. Two. Anybody else would like to take the floor at this stage? We can start now and we'll take it from there. Yes, please.
Thank you. I would like to put forward a question. It's not a question. Just
Can you please introduce yourself?
Beg your pardon?
If you can kindly
sorry.
introduce yourself so that people can...
My name is Saad Awang Damit. I come from Sabah, Malaysia, east of Malaysia. I'm participate in the civil service cooperative. So I come here just to participate this conference. So very interesting subject that you have forwarded, three of you, and but I would like to forward one of the question to Marcela. I think this is your strategy framework that you did mention that to overcome the poverty in Africa, and you did mention that 850 million poverty hunger in Africa, but and contradict that you did mention in the 2025 you have to reach the target zero hunger, zero poverty. So back to your framework, how do you apply or how do you strategize the objective? Is that tangible as a cooperative is concerned? That is very fantastic. And we talk about the agriculture. There must be the members of the cooperative and involved in agriculture must be from the middle class. I don't think that they can very fantastic achievements to promote or to enhance their products unless there is assistance from the government. So you did mention loan and grant to assess the technical assistance. Would you like to explain that? Thank you, Marcela.
Thanks very much indeed. I have a question there. The gentleman, please.
In fact, I don't have a question. I would like to make some statements. My name is Mathieu van Hoven from SERA in Belgium. I'm working for 30 years, a little bit more, in the cooperative sector, in agriculture, finance, and cooperative development. I like to say that I'm white on the outside and I'm black in the inside, because I've been living in Africa for some years. It's my sincere conviction that each good project finds its finance. If you have a strong project which is viable, you will find the finance. That's a sincere conviction of mine. En ce qui concerne le problème qui a été mentionné, le problème de la sécheresse, vous avez mentionné que vous avez un problème de financement. Le financement d'une agriculture, une agriculture qui souffre. Je suis convaincu que le problème le plus important à adresser est le problème de l'agriculture dans un pays qui souffre de la sécheresse. Et si cela est résolu, le financement, il suivra. J'en suis convaincu. As concerns your question, en ce qui concerne votre remarque de l'Afrique francophone, c'est en fait une constatation qu'on fait et que nous faisons tous, qu'il y a une grande absence maintenant du secteur coopératif dans la partie francophone en Afrique. Et je sais que Madame Chiogé est en train de prendre des initiatives pour stimuler ce qui se passe et est en train de se réaliser dans la partie anglophone pour avoir un même développement dans la partie francophone, parce qu'en effet, c'est un constat et c'est en fait un problème. I would like to finish with the statement which has been made by Mr. Couchman. He has mentioned finance is vital, but only part of the solution. I would like to add co-ops are vital, but are only part of the solution also. If you don't have a good economic project, you cannot have a good co-op, and you will not find finance.
Thank you. Well, I think it's actually been a debate rather than a series of questions, which is great. But specifically, some of the things that I'd like to respond to. One is to say that the Global Development Fund is targeting all countries in sub-Saharan Africa and not just the Anglophone countries. So that's also very important. I think the issue of that connectivity between Francophone and Anglophone cooperatives is clearly an important one. I think also the partnership that we are developing with FAO is a very valuable one, because I think we can complement each other in terms of the objects of the Global Development Fund being mid-range finance. And as Marcel has said, there are also proposals, as it were, to put in building blocks below that at the local level with technical assistance and grants. But I also think, as in line with what Peter's been saying, I think the other thing we need is that sharing of knowledge between the different countries, because I know, for example, that the system in Uganda of, you know, having a linked network of farmers' co-ops and credit unions is now being looked at in the Malawian context, where there's been some knowledge sharing going on. So how can we use also the resources within the movement at a local level, as Peter's examples in the UK, but we've also seen it be a good, as a suggestion, a good proposal for the African context. So almost in line with Mathieu's comments, you know, I think we have also to look within ourselves, because I think we still have not explored at the local level all the vehicles for financial support and assistance. And I think there is a large potential within the movement for more joined-up thinking and for more joined-up connections on cooperative on financing for cooperatives. I think I'll leave it at that, so we can I think, yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Peter.
Okay, a wonderful, rich range of comments. You know, I'm not going to do justice to them all, but I'll just try to do a few happy, pick up some other bits other than that one. I think the first thing, I think we need to go back to a couple of fundamentals on this one, which probably answers several questions in one go within that. One of the bits we've been discussing as we've attempted to move Dunsany forwards is saying that in many ways we've fallen back into old bad ways. The reality is that for an internationally focused movement, often when we actually try to organise cooperative help, we look incredibly colonial about how we try to do that. It's still very top-down, very directed, etc. And what we'd like to see, certainly at Plunkett, is us rethinking as a movement how we actually support and develop within there, rather than, you know, using the models that we saw as failed when countries did it, but we try to do that as cooperatives. So to me, the core of it, and it hits several of the questions we had there, is self-help. Now, if you're actually in a community that's struggling within that, self-help alone won't be enough, but that's the core that's going to get you going. So I don't want to see things that start with governments and then, if we're lucky, trickle down to people. I want to see things that start with people and then maybe escalate up to governments within there. So Horace Plunkett used to talk about what we needed to do this was what he called the three betters. It was better farming, better business, and better living. And by that, and in many ways, the questions actually touched on all of those. By better farming, what he meant is you shouldn't have to reinvent wheels. That probably is the role of governments and of agencies, of saying if there's knowledge and technology out there, then people should be able to access that freely and be able to use that within there. So therefore, that's the role that government could have within there. But the real benefit is better business, which he meant cooperative business. And that's the bit we can only start with ourselves within there, rather than actually reliance on someone else. And by better living, he meant, if ever your cooperative loses the roots of the community that it came from, it is wearing on to self-destruction. It may carry on for years as a corporation or whatever, but it will actually cease to unlock the benefits that you started with within there. And I think each of those questions we had touched on that one. So the methods of financing, I mean, half of it is experimenting to find the ones that work in the conditions that you're in. I'm not going to come in and say it's X, Y, Z. What I think we tend to see are the ones that are worth exploring is that role of self-help, no matter how small, because often that's the one that triggers the respect of others to then get involved, but it means that people have got a stake within there. Linda touched on, I'd really commend the idea, the link between credit unions, for instance, and others. This idea that although we don't have a huge amount as a movement, we probably have a lot more than we actually give credit for. And therefore, how do we actually use the capital that's already out there in our movement in more creative ways within there? So again, looking to ourselves first before we go outside. And then what I hope that the global GDC will start to do is to think outside the box of how we connect. The comment over there about the long-term needs in agriculture. Well, let's not just have a fund that looks the same as everyone else's fund. Let's think differently. I used to run a fund with one co-op, and when we used to stand alongside all the donors and all their long ways of doing it, we used to stand up and say, well, we're from the cooperative, we operate surprise me money. We want to find people that we believe in and then let them to surprise us on what they can achieve. So, and I think that's one of our challenges. How do we do a form of finance that looks different to everyone else's finance within there? The language one there are some amazing Francophone people working on that one. I know certainly within the GCD that there's actually going to be engagement with the French banks as well. I'm delighted there was a French speaker involved in the Dancy Declaration, so we're connected within there. So I think we have to remove language as a barrier in the world we're in now. The one thing I do find is often you'll find locked up in other languages than your own amazing models, and we have to work out how to do it. I've learned huge amounts from when I went to Quebec and spoke there. I brought far more back from there than I gave when I was speaking, but we had to break out of that language one for it. The final one about how do we actually organise the support part, this is not going to be an easy one, but I'm not convinced it's actually done from on high with big international programmes, then parachuting in to do that. I think it's about individual countries and individual organisations wanting to do it differently and then learning from each other and sharing with each other to take that forward in a different way rather than traditional aid-donor relationships we have there. So to me, the core of it all is what we call Horace on a horse. How Horace Plunkett got co-ops going in Ireland, he didn't write a report or set up a government fund to do it. He literally got on a horse, rode into those communities, sat in the village hall, listened to all the problems that they faced, which vary from community to community, and then convinced them that some of those problems could be solved by cooperatives, and then try to find the ways of helping them make those co-ops real. I think that principle applies wherever we are in the world, and self-help is always what our movement has been built on, so let's try to get some more of that. So I hope that sort of touched on most questions.
Wow, it is a very interesting debate here. Before I get into my final thoughts, I'd just like to mention that tomorrow we will be having a workshop, and I'd like to invite all of you to join that workshop. It's going to happen at 1 to 4. And the idea is that this is going to be a GDC working session, which will help identify producer organizations and cooperatives' technical assistance needs for their business growth and possible solutions that might be offered. So this is going to be a very, very interesting workshop. You're all invited. When you leave the room, Eleanor is going to be there, and she's going to be taking down your names if you would like to participate, and by all means bring others or let others know that this will be happening, so maybe there are other people who are interested. Now, it's very difficult to have concluding remarks after all the richness of the ideas that have been exchanged today. I'd just like to have a couple of thoughts. One of them is about, I thought it was very interesting that Horace Plunkett had written, probably carved in wood, this very interesting saying that says, let's cooperate to make Ireland a nation. Very interesting because you bring in cooperation and you bring in the idea of nation into the same phrase. I think from today's debate, we have heard very different points of view coming from a foundation, coming from the academic world, and coming from the United Nations, which is basically an intergovernmental organization. And I think that by our exchange, we see how we need the different perspectives, the different comparatives of advantages to come in and to address a problem, thinking out of the box, thinking innovatively. I fully agree, we won't get it solved if we continue to propose the same solutions that haven't been working in the past. So we need to be able to think out of the box, but we need to do that thinking, and that thinking process needs to be from the different points of view, integrating the different points of view. Now, we heard that finance is central, but it's not all. But then again, that cooperatives are solutions, but not solutions to everything, clearly. Here, we need to also be looking at what are the factors that are going to allow cooperatives to provide solutions, and the factors that are going to make finance instruments that will provide solutions and hopefully also sustainable solutions. Here is where we come in more from the UN point of view with the enabling environment. So our role from the United Nations is to help governments look at what is necessary for cooperatives to be able to provide those solutions in terms of making the environment, the enabling environment, which is necessary, putting it in place. So what needs to be there from the legislation point of view, what needs to be there from the taxation point of view, etc. You may know that in a couple of countries still the rights of association are not respected. They're not seen as good rights. And therefore, we come in from the UN point of view to say, this needs to be in place, and we use the power of the UN to advocate for these measures to be put in place by the different governments. So each one from their own point of view brings in parts of those solutions, and I would say none of those points of view would be enough on their own. So again, here we need to ensure that we do address the issue from much more of a holistic perspective, where knowledge and understanding what goes right, what goes wrong, what is a good practice, what are the failures, all of that is an essential part of how we're going to take the agenda forward. Now, another essential part, and this is inspired by the comment from our friend from Malaysia, is the role of the smallholders. Smallholders are a very essential part of all of the food production in the world. Yet the smallholders are the ones who are usually in very, very critical situation. And we have seen that when the smallholders are organized and when the smallholders participate in cooperatives, they are much better able to feed themselves and to provide growth. But the point from having the individual smallholders scattered around without having organization between them, and getting the organizations to be there, cooperatives or other kinds of organizations, is a very, very big leap. We know from our data that during the crisis, food price crisis, financial crisis, and so on, that those smallholders who were in different kinds of organizations were much better able to face the consequences of that crisis. There was a resilience that came just by the fact of being organized. So again, we need to ensure that we are able to promote this kind of organization much better through the different perspectives from the point of view of what the governments need to be doing, because the governments should not be there in a top-down, as Peter says, in a top-down attitude to tell people what to do, what not to do. This should be coming from the bottom. But then there's a different role for the governments, and they have to be performing this role. And this is part of what we work for in the United Nations. Now, will we be able to address the challenge? The challenge is, today, there are 842 million people who are hungry worldwide. This is down from last year, 868 million, so this is a good progress in that sense, but way far from where we want to be, which is zero hunger. And as the African countries have said just in this last July, with the declaration of Addis Ababa, we commit ourselves to having zero hunger by 2025. Will this be possible? I know that there's also reason to approach the question with a little bit of doubt. Are we going to be able to do that? I'm not sure. But the fact that there is will to do it is a very important one step forward. That is not going to be the overall solution. But we also know that with strong cooperatives, that leap is much easier to give than in the absence of them.